Section 9 of A Popular History of France, Volume 5. This recording is in the public domain. A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, Volume 5, by Francois Guizot, translated by Robert Black. Chapter 36. Henry IV, Catholic King, 1593 to 1610, Part 4. The day before, June 7, Henry had written to his sister Catherine de Bourbon, "My dear sister, the more I go on, the more do I wonder at the grace shown me by God in the fight of last Monday, wherein I thought to have defeated but 1,200 horse; but they must be set down at 2,000. The Constable of Castile was there in person with the Duke of Mayenne, and they both of them saw me and recognized me quite well. They sent to demand of me a whole lot of Italian and Spanish captains of theirs, the which were not prisoners. They must be amongst the dead, who have been buried, for I requested next day that they should be. Many of our young noblemen, seeing me with them everywhere, were full of fire in this engagement, and showed a great deal of courage; amongst whom I came across Gramont, Termes, Boissy, La Curse, and the Marquis of Mirabeau, who, as luck would have it, found themselves at it without any armor but their neck pieces and gaillardets (front and back plates), and did marvels. There were others who did not do so well, and many who did very ill. Those who were not there ought to be sorry for it, seeing that I had need of all my good friends, and I saw you very near becoming my heiress." Lettres missives de Henri IV, pages 363 to 369, in the Collection des Documents Inédits sur l'Histoire de France. This fight, so unpremeditated, at Fontaine Francaise, and the presence of mind, steady quicksightedness, and brilliant dash of Henry IV led off this long war gloriously. Its details were narrated and sought after minutely; people were especially struck with the sympathetic attention that, in the very midst of the strife, the king bestowed upon all his companions in arms, either to give them directions or to warn them of danger. "At the hottest of the fight," says the contemporary historian Peter Mathieu, "Henry, seizing Mirabeau by the arm, said, 'Charge yonder,' which he did; and that troop began to thin off and disappear." A moment afterwards, seeing one of the enemy's men at arms darting down upon the French, Henry concluded that the attack was intended for Gilbert de la Cure, a brave and pious Catholic lord, whom he called familiarly Monsieur le Cure, and shouted to him from afar, "Look out, la Cure!" which warned him and saved his life. The roughest warriors were touched by this fraternal solicitude of the king's, and clung to him with passionate devotion. It was at Rome, and in the case of an ecclesiastical question, that Henry IV.'s steady policy, his fame for ability as well as valor, and the glorious affair of Fontaine Francaise bore their first fruits. Mention has already been made of the formal refusal the king had met with from Pope Clement VIII. In January, 1594, when he had demanded of him, by the embassy extraordinary of the Duke of Nevers, confirmation of the absolution granted him by the French bishops after his conversion at St. Denis and his anointment at Chartres. The pope, in spite of his refusal, had indirectly given the royal agents to understand that they were not to be discouraged; and the ablest of them, Arnauld d'Ossat, had remained at Rome to conduct this delicate and dark mission. When Clement VIII. Saw Henry IV.'s government growing stronger and more extensive day by day, Paris returned to his power, the League beaten, and the Gallican church upheld in its maxims by the French magistracy, fear of schism grew serious at Rome; and the pope had a hint given by Cardinal de Gondi to Henry, that, if he were to send fresh ambassadors, they might be favorably listened to. Arnauld d'Ossat had acquired veritable weight at the court of Rome, and had paved the way with a great deal of art towards turning to advantage any favorable chances that might offer themselves. Villeroi, having broken with the League, had become Henry IV.'s minister of foreign affairs, and obtained some confidence at Rome in return for the good will he testified towards the papacy. By his councillors' advice, no doubt, the king made no official stir, sent no brilliant embassy. D'Ossat quietly resumed negotiations, and alone conducted them from the end of 1594 to the spring of 1595; and when a new envoy was chosen to bring them to a conclusion, it was not a great lord, but a learned ecclesiastic, Abbot James du Perron, whose ability and devotion Henry IV. Had already, at the time of his conversion, experienced, and whom he had lately appointed Bishop of Evreux. Even when Du Perron had been fixed upon to go to Rome and ask for the absolution which Clement VIII. Had 7 or 8 months before refused, he was in no hurry to repair thither, and D'Ossat's letters make it appear that he was expected there with some impatience. He arrived there on the 12th of July, 1595, and, in concert with D'Ossat, he presented to the pope the request of the king, who solicited the papal benediction, absolution from any censure, and complete reconciliation with the Roman church. Clement VIII., on the 2d of August, assembled his consistory, whither went all the cardinals, save 2 partisans of Spain, who excused themselves on the score of health. Parleys took place as to the form of the decree which must precede the absolution. The pope would have liked very much to insert 2 clauses, one revoking as null and void the absolution already given to the king by the French bishops at the time of his conversion, and the other causing the absolution granted by the pope to be at the same time considered as re establishing Henry IV. In his rights to the crown, whereof it was contended that he was deprived by the excommunication and censures of Sixtus V. and Gregory XIV., which this absolution was to remove. The 2 French negotiators rejected these attempts, and steadily maintained the complete independence of the king's temporal sovereignty, as well as the power of intervention of the French episcopate in his absolution. Clement VIII. Was a judicious and prudent pope, and he did not persist. The absolution was solemnly pronounced on the 17th of September, 1595, by the pope himself, from a balcony erected in St. Peter's Square, and in presence of the population. The gates of the church were thrown open, and a Te Deum was sung. A grand ceremony took place immediately afterwards in the church of St. Louis of the French. Rome was illuminated for 3 days, and on the 7th of November following, a pope's messenger left for Paris with the bull of absolution drawn up in the terms agreed upon. Another reconciliation, of less solemnity but of great importance, that between the Duke of Mayenne and Henry IV., took place a week after the absolution pronounced by the pope. As soon as the civil war, continued by the remnants of the dying League, was no more than a disgraceful auxiliary to the foreign war between France and Spain, Mayenne was in his soul both grieved and disgusted at it. The affair of Fontaine Francaise gave him an opportunity of bringing matters to a crisis. He next day broke with the Constable of Castile, Don Ferdinand de Velasco, who declined to follow his advice, and at once entered into secret negotiations with the king. Henry wrote from Lyons to Du Plessis Mornay on the 24th of August, 1595, "The Duke of Mayenne has asked me to allow him 3 months, for the purpose of informing the enemy of his determination in order to induce them to join me in recognizing me and serving me. So doing, he has also agreed to bind himself from this present date to recognize me and serve me, whatever his friends may do." On the 23d of September following, Henry IV., still at Lyons, sent to M. de la Chatre, "I forward you the articles of a general truce which I have granted to the Duke of Mayenne at his pressing instance, and on the assurance he has given me that he will get it accepted and observed by all those who are still making war within my kingdom, in his name or that of the League." This truce was, in point of fact, concluded by a preliminary treaty signed at Chalons, and by virtue of which Mayenne ordered his lieutenants to give up to the king the citadel of Dijon. The negotiations continued, and in January, 1596, a royal edict signed at Folembray, near Laon, regulated, in 31 articles and some secret articles, the conditions of peace between the king and Mayenne. The king granted him, himself, and his partisans full and complete amnesty for the past, besides 3 surety places for 6 years, and divers sums, which may be for payment of his debts, and may be for his future provision, amounted to 3,580,000 livres at that time, or 12,888,000 francs of the present day. The Parliament of Paris considered these terms exorbitant, and did not consent to enregister the edict until April 9, 1596, after 3 letters jussory from the king. Henry IV. Nobly expressed, in the preamble of the edict, the motives of policy that led to his generous arrangements. After alluding to his late reconciliation with the pope, "Our work," he said, "would have been imperfect and peace incomplete, if our most dear and most beloved cousin, the Duke of Mayenne, chief of his party, had not followed the same road, as he resolved to do so soon as he saw that our Holy Father had approved of our reunion. This hath made us to perceive better than heretofore the aim of his actions, to accept and take in good part all that he hath exhibited against us of the zeal he felt for religion, and to commend the anxiety he hath displayed to preserve the kingdom in its entirety, whereof he caused not and suffered not the dismemberment when the prosperity of his affairs seemed to give him some means of it; the which he was none the more inclined to do when he became weakened, but preferred to throw himself into our arms rather than betake himself to other remedies, which might have caused the war to last a long while yet, to the great damage of our people. This it is which hath made us desire to recognize his good intent, to love him and treat him for the future as our good relative and faithful subject." [Memoires de la Ligue, p. 349.] To a profound and just appreciation of men's conduct Henry IV. knew how to add a winning grace and the surprising charm of a familiar manner. After having signed the edict of Folembray, he had gone to rest a while at Monceaux. Mayenne went to visit him there on the 31st of January, 1596. There is nothing to be added or to taken from the account given by Sully of their interview. "The king, stepping forward to meet Mayenne, embraced him thrice, assuring him that he was welcome, and that he embraced him as cordially as if there had never been anything between them. M. de Mayenne put one knee on the ground, embraced the king's thigh, and assured him that he was his very humble servant and subject, saying that he considered himself greatly bounden to him, as well for having with so much of gentleness, kindness, and special largesses restored him to his duty, as for having delivered him from the Spanish arrogance and Italian crafts and wiles. Then the king, having raised him up and embraced him once more, told him that he had no doubt at all of his honor and word, for a man of worth and of good courage held nothing so dear as the observance thereof. Thereupon he took him by the hand and began to walk him about at a very great pace, showing him the alleys and telling all his plans and the beauties and conveniences of this mansion. M. de Mayenne, who is incommoded by a sciatica, followed as best he could, but some way behind, dragging his limbs after him very heavily; which the king observing, and that he was mighty red, heated, and was puffing with thickness of breath, he turned to Rosny, whom he held with the other hand, and said in his ear, 'If I walk this fat carcass here about much longer, then am I avenged without much difficulty for all the evils he hath done us, for he is a dead man.' And thereupon, pulling up, the king said to him, 'Tell the truth, cousin, I go a little too fast for you, and I have worked you too hard.' 'By my faith, sir,' said M. de Mayenne, slapping his hand upon his stomach, 'it is true. I swear to you that I am so tired and out of breath that I can no more. If you had continued walking me about so fast, for honor and courtesy did not permit me to say to you, Hold, enough, and still less to leave you, I believe that you would have killed me without a thought of it.' Then the king embraced him, clapped him on the shoulder, and said with a laughing face, open glance, and holding out his hand, 'Come, take that, cousin, for, by God, this is all the injury and displeasure you shall ever have from me; of that I give you my honor and word with all my heart, the which I never did and never will violate.' 'By God, sir,' answered M. de Mayenne, kissing the king's hand, and doing what he could to put one knee upon the ground, 'I believe it and all other generous things that may be expected from the best and bravest prince of our age; and you said it, too, in so frank a spirit and with so kindly a grace that my feelings and my obligations are half as deep again. However, I swear to you over again, sir, by the living God, on my faith, my honor, and my salvation, that I will be to you, all my life long, loyal subject and faithful servant. I will never fail you nor desert you. I will have while I live no desires or designs of importance which are not suggested by your Majesty himself. Nor will I ever be cognizant of them in the case of others, though they were my own children, without expressly opposing them and giving you notice of them at once. There, cousin," rejoined the king, "I quite believe it; and that you may be able to love me and serve me long, go rest you, refresh you, and drink a draught at the castle. I have in my cellars some Arbois wine, of which I will send you 2 bottles, for well I know that you do not dislike it. And here is Rosny, whom I will lend you to accompany you, to do the honors of the house, and to conduct you to your chamber. He is one of my oldest servants, and one of those who have been most rejoiced to see that you would love me and serve me cordially." (Oeconomie royale, pp. 7 to 10.) Mayenne was as good as his word. After the edict of Folembray, he lived 14 years at the court of Henry IV., whom he served only about 16 months; for he died on the 4th of October, 1611, and Henry IV. was assassinated by Ravaillac on the 13th of May, 1610, and during all that time he was loyal and faithful to him, never giving him any but good counsels, and sometimes rendering him useful services. A rare example of a party chief completely awakened and tamed by experience. It made him disgusted with fanaticism, faction, civil war, and complicity with a foreigner. He was the least brilliant but the most sensible, the most honest, and the most French of the Guises. Henry IV., when seriously ill at Fontainebleau in 1608, recommended him to Queen Mary de' Medici as one of the men whom it was most important to call to the councils of state; and at the approach of death, Mayenne, weary and weak in the lap of repose, could conscientiously address those who were around him in such grand and Christian language as this: "It is no new thing to know that I must die. For 12 years past my lingering and painful life has been for the most part an apprenticeship thereto. My sufferings have so dulled the sting of death that I rather count upon it than dread it. Happy to have had so long a delay to teach me to make a good end, and to rid me of the things which formerly kept me from that knowledge. Happy to meet my end amongst mine own people and to terminate by a peaceful death the sufferings and miseries of my life. I formerly sought death amidst arms; but I am better pleased, for my soul's salvation, to meet it and embrace it on my bed than if I had encountered it in battle, for the sake of the glory of the world." Let us return to Henry IV. Since his declaration of war against Philip II. he had gained much ground. He had fought gloriously, in his own person, and beaten the Spaniards at Fontaine Francaise. He had obtained from Pope Clement VIII. The complete and solemn absolution which had been refused to him the year before. Mayenne had submitted to him, and that submission had been death to the League. Some military reverses were intermingled with these political successes. Between the 25th of June, 1595, and the 10th of March, 1597, the Spanish armies took, in Picardy and Artois, Le Catelet, Doullens, Cambrai, Ardres, Ham, Guines, and 2 towns of more importance, Calais, still the object of English ambition and of offers on the part of Queen Elizabeth to any one who could hand it over to her, and Amiens, one of the keys to France on the frontier of the north. These checks were not without compensation. Henry invested and took a strong place at La Fere, and he retook Amiens after a 6 months' struggle. A Spanish plot for getting possession of Marseilles failed. The young Duke of Guise, whom Henry had made governor of Provence, entered the city amidst shouts of "Hurrah for the king!" "Now I am king!" cried Henry, on receiving the news, so generally was Marseilles even then regarded as the queen of the Mediterranean. The Duke of Epernon, who had attempted to make of Provence an independent principality for himself, was obliged to leave it and treat with the king, ever ready to grant easy terms to those who could give up to him or sell him any portion of his kingdom. France was thus being rapidly reconstituted. "Since the month of January, 1596, Burgundy, parts of Forez, Auvergne, and Velay, the whole of Provence, half Languedoc, and the last town of Poitou had been brought back to their allegiance to the king. French territory and national unity had nothing more to wait for to complete their re establishment than a portion of Brittany and 4 towns of Picardy, still occupied by the Spaniards." Poirson, Histoire du règne d'Henri IV., p. 159. But these results were only obtained at enormous expense, and by means of pecuniary sacrifices, loans, imposts, obligations of every sort, which left the king in inextricable embarrassment, and France in a condition of exhaustion still further aggravated by the deplorable administration of the public finances. On the 15th of April, 1596, Henry IV. wrote from Amiens to Rosny, "My friend, you know as well as any of my servants what troubles, labors, and fatigues I have had to go through to secure my life and my dignity against so many sorts of enemies and perils. Nevertheless, I swear to you that all these traverses have not caused me so much affliction and bitterness of spirit as the sorrow and annoyance I now feel at finding thyself in continual controversies with those most in authority of my servants, officers, and councillors of state, when I would fain set about restoring this kingdom to its highest splendor, and relieving my poor people, whom I love as my dear children, God having at present granted me no others, from so many talliages, subsidies, vexations, and oppressions whereof they daily make complaints to me. Having written to them who are of my council of finance how that I had a design of extreme importance in hand for which I had need of a fund of 800,000 crowns, and therefore I begged and conjured them, by their loyalty and sincere affection towards me in France, to labor diligently for the certain raising of that sum, all their answers, after several delays, excuses, and reasons whereof one destroyed another, had finally no other conclusion than representations of difficulties and impossibilities. Nay, they feared not to send me word that, so far from being able to furnish me with so notable a sum, they found great trouble in raising the funds to keep my household going. I am so resolved to know truly whether the necessities which are overwhelming me proceed from the malice, bad management, or ignorance of those whom I employ, or, good sooth, from the diminution of my revenues and the poverty of my people. And to that end I mean to convoke the three orders of my kingdom, for to have of them some advice and aid, and meanwhile to establish among those people some loyal servant of mine, whom I will put in authority little by little, in order that he may inform me of what passes in my council, and enlighten me as to that which I desire to know. I have, as I have already told you, cast my eyes upon you to serve me in this commission, not doubting at all that I shall receive contentment and advantage from your administration. And I wish to tell you the state to which I am reduced, which is such that I am very near the enemy, and have not, as you may say, a horse to fight on, or a whole suit of harness to my back. My shirts are all torn, my doublets out at elbows, my cupboard is often bare, and for the last 2 days I have been dining and supping with one and another. My purveyors say they have no more means of supplying my table, especially as for more than 6 months they have had no money. Judge whether I deserve to be so treated, and fail not to come. I have on my mind, besides, 2 or 3 other matters of consequence, on which I wish to employ you the moment you arrive. Do not speak of all this to anybody whatsoever, not even to your wife. Adieu, my friend, whom well I love." End of Section 9.